Welcome, everybody, to Radicalized Truth Survives podcast. I'm Heidi Kuda, and today High Fidelity and I are bringing back best-selling author Gareth Gore. He, of course, is the financial reporter who found himself inside of this big, huge story, and he exposed it, the cult within the Catholic Church, Opus Dei. And he is back, returning from being our most watched episode ever, to give us an update on the human trafficking prosecutions currently occurring in Argentina against Opus Dei. And they're actually going after some of the top level members of that cult. Have a listen. Gareth Gore, we are so grateful that you are back with us. As I mentioned to you recently, the most watched episode of Little Old Radicalized Pod was your episode, the first interview that we did with you. And that is pretty exciting. It just shows that people are hungry for good information about your opus. You wrote the book on Opus Dei, and it is your opus at this point. And since we last met with you, everything that you said was going to happen, everything you predicted is basically coming true. You have this extremist sect within the Catholic Church being prosecuted in Argentina for human trafficking. You have a new pope who may try to bat a little bit of cleanup, but maybe not too much because it's a very powerful group. And I'm looking so forward to an update. I think it's really important that our viewers know that your book was just chosen by Publishers Weekly as being one of the best books of 2024, which is nothing minor. That's a big deal. Congratulations all around. Congratulations on your tenacity. And what can you sort of update our viewers on that is most pertinent in developing news related to Opus Dei? There's a lot, but what is the most important thing you feel they should know about?
Well, first of all, thanks for having me back. And yeah, wow. I looked up before I got on the call, and it's 10 months since we recorded that podcast. And what a 10 months it's been. There's been a lot that's been going on. So you mentioned, yeah, first of all, I mean, I think for me the headlines, there are two big things. One is the death of Francis and his successor, Pope Leo, what that means for Opus Dei, what that means for the ongoing reforms of Opus Dei, Francis's efforts to really kind of rein this organization in. And two is this bombshell news from Argentina, where federal prosecutors are bringing charges of human trafficking against Opus Dei. And it is of course huge news, and there's going to be a court case there, the outcome of which we will all be watching. But and I can't emphasize this enough. This is the tip of the iceberg. What happened in Argentina was not a one-off. There were similar schemes all over the world, in Africa, Southeast Asia, Europe, right across Latin America. So, this could be the next big scandal to hit the church. So yeah, we'll all be watching that.
It's really important that people understand that what I learned from you and your work is that this human trafficking that they're being charged with in Argentina almost feels like a business model that was duplicated in other countries where young, poor girls who had very little opportunities would be selected to then work within this organization. And, 30 years later, they are still there. And as you had explained to me recently, looking for their pensions, and then they find out that they weren't even, you know, on the map anywhere. And can you explain that piece of it a little bit? Because I think that's kind of where a lot of this started.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So, I think you're absolutely correct in calling this a business model. This was a scheme that was cooked up by the founder of Opus Dei in the 1940s, and ever since then they've been recruiting underprivileged girls, just girls, not boys, to work as domestic servants in Opus Dei centers around the world. So these people are basically expected to work for free. They cook and clean and do whatever's needed by the elite, for the elite members of Opus Dei. So, I mean, as you said, so this all stems from a group of 43 women who used to be what they call numeri servants, numeri assistants in Opus Dei, who were these domestic slaves. They left the organization, and then as they were kind of nearing pension age, they applied, for their pensions, which they thought they were entitled to, and they were told by the state in Argentina that no pension contributions had been made for them. And so they were like, what the hell? I mean, we were working for years inside Opus Dei. We were told that these contributions were being made. And so they went, they went after Opus Dei and tried to get them the money that they thought was owed to them. Opus Dei refused to even engage with them and their lawyers. And things, I mean, which turns out to have been a huge mistake by Opus Dei, because things just gradually kind of got escalated, and now it's turned into a whole human trafficking and labor exploitation case. I mean, the federal prosecutors that have taken this case on, they've been quite clear. They've called this a deceptive system that specifically targeted girls. They said the girls were basically given these false promises of an education and a better life in order to lure them into the organization. They've said that these girls were, and later young women and older women were deprived of basic labor rights. They said that, and this whole system was enforced through what they call various forms of violence, including psychological violence, economic violence, and even physical violence as well. So, they're pretty clear this was a systematic and deliberate misrepresentation and exploitation of minors. And, I very much hope that Opus Dei and the people involved in this will be brought to justice.
Wow. I've got one more thing I'd like to ask, and Hi-Fi, you jump in. So one of the things I learned from you is that this group um, is all about power and kind of using the spirituality of people and using the teachings of the church as kind of their way in for these power grabs. And they target people. And in America, as we know, Opus Dei affiliates are responsible for why we had this judicial coup, which allowed us to be in this horrible situation with with a current leader who just acts like he's a Caesar, acts like a Roman emperor, like he can do anything. And he essentially has been able to so far. And can you kind of give people a sense of um, how they use spiritual teachings and religious teachings to just go for complete and total power grabs?
Yeah, I mean, so Opus Dei presents itself as a kind of spiritual organization, as they're officially part of the Catholic Church. They've been legitimized by Pope John Paul II, given these special privileges. And so when they kind of go knocking on the doors, and so they seek people out to begin with. Everyday Catholics don't go onto the Opus Dei website and, punch in their details and ask whether they can be members or not. Opus Dei decides who it wants in its ranks and goes out and targets them specifically. And it generally targets people who are part of the elite, people in positions of power, politicians, business people, judges, journalists, academics, people who are in positions of influence, who are able to kind of push through the kinds of changes that they want. So they present, first of all, they present themselves to these people as a Catholic organization that might help them to dig deeper into their faith, become, maybe kind of explore their spirituality and be closer to God. And they use various mechanisms. So, of course, confession is part of it, but they also offer these spiritual guidance sessions. And these are kind of, this is a kind of core tool, a core kind of methodology for Opus Dei to really kind of insert itself into the lives of its members, and then to I guess, exert a certain amount of control and influence by using kind of, abusing, you might say, the Catholicism in order to push them into doing what it thinks is the right thing to do.
Wow, 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 wow. High fidelity.
So one thing I've been kind of following, because we had our interview with you. I'm well aware of your work. As a former member of the Catholic Church, I'm interested to see how the leadership of the church will react to this. And while I have seen Pope Leo kind of shaking his stick at Opus Dei, I haven't seen him actually whack them with that stick. What do you think is going on there?
Well, I mean, I think even Pope Francis, for he was the one that really kicked this off, that really decided that Opus Dei needed to be reined in, that it had gone too far. The abuses were just they just couldn't ignore them anymore, and he decided to take action. But he also trod very carefully. He could have gone, after them full throat, kind of, close them down, but he didn't. And that's because this organization is very powerful, has very wealthy backers. And, Pope Francis didn't want to kind of, I guess, upset this. The church was already deeply divided between left and right, and between all kinds of different factions. And he didn't kind of, I guess, want to rock the boat too much. So even Pope Francis was treading very carefully. I think Pope Leo is kind of walking that same tightrope. I think he, in his heart, wants to do the right thing, as Francis did, but he he's the head of this extremely important organization. It's it's his responsibility to try to preserve the church, to try to preserve the church's finances, to try to preserve you know the number of members, the membership of the church. And so I guess he's trying. It's this very difficult balancing act of, yes, we want to do the right thing, we want to go after this organization, we want to address its abuses, but at the same time, we don't want to open up more fissures within in the church. We don't want to open the church up to huge compensation claims, and we don't want to drive many of the faithful out. I mean, I think what happened with the Boston Globe scandal, I guess more than 20 years ago, has been, that was a big lesson for the church because, when all of that came out into the open, so many Catholics turned their backs on the church. Mass attendance really kind of plummeted. And I think that's kind of in the back of their minds. And of course, the financial consequences of all of that scandal as well. I mean, they're still playing out today. You still have various kind of dioceses around the US filing for bankruptcy because of the ongoing compensation claims that have arisen from the abuse scandal. And so I think Pope Leo and Pope Francis back in the day, this is very much in the back of their minds. They need to address things, but they need to do it in a very political way, in a way that doesn't cause too much damage for the institution. So while, you would hope as good Christians, as good Catholics, that they would do the right thing, I very much suspect that whatever action is taken will be a bit of a kind of fudge. They'll try to protect the church as much as they can.
Yeah, it is. As we've learned, this group is so powerful that even the Pope, we've seen, has to tread a bit lightly. But at least the previous Pope did take some action, did sanction some of its members. There were moves that were made that at least signaled that there was an awareness that this group has been abusing its power. And so that was very encouraging. And what happens from here remains to be seen. As a financial reporter who stumbles across one of the biggest stories, of the last century, what has your life been like recently? Like, what has the work that you've done kind of led to your present being like? Because it cannot be that easy taking on something as massive as this. And what has been the response from the church, from Opus Dei itself?
I mean, I never set out to write a book about Opus Dei. I mean, I basically fell into this by accident. I was sent to report on a Spanish bank that had collapsed, and I basically uncovered this crazy scandal where, I discovered that Opus Dei had hijacked this bank more than 60 years ago and then transformed it into a cash machine for itself to enable it to expand all around the world. And so, so I Um, when I was reporting it, as a journalist, you're just kind of led by the story. You report, you talk to as many people as you can, you try and gather as much evidence as you can, and you just see where things lead you. And there was, at no point along that stage did I ever think, maybe I'm kind of getting into something a bit too deep here, or maybe I shouldn't be pushing too much. As a journalist, you just want to keep following the story and see where it takes you. And so when I put the book out, I guess I was perhaps naively unprepared for what was to come. I mean, you know, in the weeks before the book came out, I received all kinds of legal threats. Opus Dei contracted a very famous defamation firm in the US to come after me and my publisher. All credit to Simon and Schuster. They stood behind me the whole way, and they defended me. The book came out, and the attacks continued. This time in the media, Opus Dei used its connections in the right-wing media, and in particular in the kind of right-wing Catholic media, to really, I guess, try to besmirch my character, to try to kind of throw mud at me. And they talked about me being a liar, conspiracy theorist. At no point did they actually engage really with the serious allegations of the book, which I think tells you all you need to know about the organization. It's not interested in rooting out wrongdoing or trying to get to the bottom of any of these alleged crimes. It just wants to protect itself. And it's been that, we're coming up to almost a year since the book came out now. And yeah, the attacks continue on Twitter, in the media as well. And we're about to put out a paperback version of the book with an update. There's going to be a new afterword in there, which kind of brings the story right up to date. And I'm sure it'll be the same again. They'll be trying to throw dirt at me, but they just, they won't engage with any of the real issues. But I mean, what I would say is that what I'm very pleased about is how I think the book has created a space for discussion. So regardless of, what Opus Dei tries to do to diminish the book, whatever, however the Vatican responds to the book and the allegations coming out about Opus Dei, what's great is that people, former members are coming forward in droves now to share their stories. And I've been contacted by people who were members of Opus Dei when the book came out, who've decided to leave since. And it's quite good now that people, I think, no longer feel afraid to share their stories and share their experiences of life inside of Opus Dei.
It is so important. And I know that we talked about this last time. It's also very important for people to know that millions and millions and millions of Catholics have nothing to do with the extremist elements within the church. And as Gareth said, people are targeted and identified. And unfortunately, the targeting and the identification of some people has really helped, um, you know, uh, hammer away at the sort of receding democracy in America because of the half dozen Supreme Court justices, which were chosen through, various Opus Dei elements. We know from our friend Tom Carter the outsized influence that Leonard Leo has had. He's sort of known as the SCOTUS Whisperer, but clearly his tentacles reach out to Opus Dei in every direction. And maybe this is a good time to remind people of how many people around Trump who actually worked in his administration were either openly members of Opus Dei or certainly affiliated. Because again, it's when we talk about them using spirituality for power, we're talking about power at the highest levels.
Yeah, the influence that Opus Dei has in a town like Washington, D.C. is absolutely staggering. I mean, the center of Opus Dei's operations in Washington, D.C. is this place called the Catholic Information Center. And just on the board of that one little kind of center in central DC, you have Leonard Leo, who, as you were just saying, is basically the architect of this conservative takeover of the US Supreme Court and all the consequences that come from that. Obviously Roe v. Wade, but there've been so many rulings since then that are really shifting really kind of reshaping American society. You've got people like Bill Barr, who was Attorney General during the first Trump administration. You've got people like Mick Mulvaney, who was the kind of the budget chief in the first Trump administration. People like Pat Cipollone, who was the White House chief counsel. And just coming back to Leonard Leo, I mean, he's very supportive of Opus Dei's I guess the Opus Dei network in the States, and he's been giving money to various Opus Dei initiatives. He's also behind this initiative to really expand the Opus Dei school network right across the US. The Opus Dei school network is a primary place where it recruits not just kids, but also the parents. It attracts all of these elite families, especially in DC. It operates two schools. It's got about, I think it's 6 or 7 schools across the US, but they want to expand that to around 40. And, it's part of what Leonard Leo talks about, this reshaping of the culture of society. And they want to do that. They've already had great success in the courts and in politics, and they're now turning to the worlds of entertainment, education, the media. They really envisage like a complete takeover of American society and culture.
'Cause we I feel like we have so many fronts that we have to fight. Those of us who are, in the information war, and you just have, those of us who focus on Trump Russia, and it's like, and here's another one with, tentacles, everywhere and expanding. And it's tough. It's tough. I don't even know where we would start other than through exposure, which I think is incredibly important. Has there been anything that you could see since your books come out that kind of offers sort of a road to maybe try to disrupt some of their power?
I mean, I think the Opus Dei modus operandi over the years has been to infiltrate the levers of society, but to do it in a very kind of non-transparent way, to do it very much under the radar, to have its people kind of, I guess, moving those levers of power, but without doing it, without kind of doing it overtly and without talking about it publicly. And so I think the best thing we can do is for people like myself and others to expose the various connections so that people can make their own judgments when they see, the likes of Leonard Leo or Bill Barr or Mick Mulvaney, when they see them operating in the kind of public civic sphere. They can then make the connections that these people have to Opus Dei and kind of draw their own conclusions about what the real aims are here and who's driving what.
Wow, high fidelity.
It's funny because we've been talking about Opus Dei and Leonard Leo and Bill Barr. One name we haven't mentioned is, of course, Peter Thiel, who was confidant of Father Arne Panula, who was the head of Opus Dei in America for many, many years, having met at Stanford. But here's my question for you. Okay, so you've uncovered embezzlement, right? And there's currently a trial for human trafficking. And apparently, this has been going on globally. Why are governments of the world not recognizing or proclaiming that Opus Dei is a criminal network involved in racketeering and influence? Because that's what it sounds like to me.
I mean, I think the simple answer to that is religion. I think people are terrified of pointing their fingers at a religious organization. I think, um, I mean, as we were saying before, I mean, my belief is that this Opus Dei is a political organization that masquerades as a religious organization. But religion is a very convenient cover because it affords you all kinds of freedoms. It gives you all kinds of privileges when it comes to the tax month, the IRS as well. I mean, they can hide behind all of these. They don't have to disclose all kinds of income. But also, I think, it creates a fear, especially in the media and among politicians. People don't want to be seen kind of pointing their fingers at this because they're going to be accused of being bigots. I've been accused of being a bigot and of being a Catholic hater and the rest of it. I'd like I'd like to say, I would emphasize that I'm none of the above. I've simply been following the money here. But but at the same time, you know, I think that allows them to get away with so much. And the Catholic Church has a lot to answer for. The Catholic Church, I guess, has well, I the Catholic Church has given this organization legitimacy, and with Opus Dei has used that legitimacy to get away with all kinds of stuff. And the Catholic Church should be the one that is clamping down on this organization. And I guess Francis has taken some tentative steps, and we're yet to see what Leo will do. But they should have been the ones that reined this thing in, years, decades ago, and they didn't for whatever reason, because it, wasn't in their interests. And we're paying for that failure right now. And I only hope that the current Pope does the right thing. But as I said earlier, I'm dubious that he will because of these conflicting interests.
Wow. Maybe what's really our hope in the disruption is actually the prosecution that's taking place in Argentina. That may be the best hope that we have at the moment, because certainly in America we have found out that when there are young people involved in situations like that, it can actually blow up and become much, much bigger and much more detrimental to people as they try to bury it. I think you know what I'm talking about without saying it. So the book is called Opus, The Cult of Dark Money, Human Trafficking, and Right-Wing Conspiracy Inside the Catholic Church. A paperback edition is coming out that's updated, but we also have the book available right now. And again, as I mentioned at the beginning, a bestseller and also a number one top book by Publishers Weekly. One thing I'd like you to tell us before we leave is there anything that you're working on now that you can tell us about? Give us a tease or something.
Well, just to come back to the Opus Dei stuff, I mean, this story is developing the whole time. And so if people want to really stay up to date, I think the best way of doing that is to either follow me on X, Blue Sky. I also have a Substack page. People are welcome to follow me on there. To answer your question, I have got I've got the bug of the writing books bug. I very much enjoyed the researching and writing of the first book. I think I did a pretty okay job, and I'd love to do it again. I really would. And I'm kind of I'm dabbling in a few areas right now. I'm very interested in the kind of intersection of Silicon Valley and politics, the wider economy, and that, there's a lot of parallels with the first book there. I mean,
Yes.
certain cultish tendencies there, and
Yes.
there's a,
Yes. Just a little.
following the money and this desire to really shape society and politics for financial gain and for ideological reasons. So, there are certain parallels, but it's a very different story as well. So, yeah, I mean, so if any of your viewers have any tips or suggestions of things for me to read
Mm.
or me to contact, then please get in touch.
I love this. I love this. Yes, do follow his Substack, support his Substack. I sure do. I'm really glad that you were here with us today, and I'm very glad that you took your follow the money financial reporting background into the investigative journalism world. We're all better for it. Gareth Gore, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you guys for having me on. It's been a pleasure.